front of you is the only woman Michelangelo ever loved. However, their love was a bit strange. Michelangelo was always afraid to get close to her. Why? I'll explain in a minute, and not just to her. He generally avoided people and didn't like them much, including himself. Michelangelo was the creator of perhaps the most beautiful body in the history of art, yet there was a suspicion that he felt only disgust towards his own body. The question is, do we need to know all these intimate details about the dark corners of his psychology to truly understand his art? My answer is yes, we do.
Usually, digging into the dirty laundry of great artists is a completely pointless activity. Art stands on its own. Everyday details stand on their own. But Michelangelo is an exception. I am convinced that only by understanding what kind of person he was can we truly see his works and grasp the messages hidden within them. And to understand what kind of person Michelangelo was, you can only do so by paying attention to those very peculiarities in his behavior, which perhaps no one has told you about before, but I will correct that now. If you haven't seen me before, my name is Alexei Pashkov. I am a historian and art critic, and in my lectures I help people understand art more deeply and subtly, decipher its hidden meanings, and derive more pleasure from engaging with it. Some of my lectures are available on social media, but all the most interesting, most comprehensive, and most profound content is posted in a private club for art enthusiasts. The link to it is in the description, so when you finish watching, take a look there to learn more about the club. It's quite possible that it will interest you. But before checking out the club, let's take a look together into the workshop set where the young Michelangelo was working. In a few seconds, something terrible will happen in this workshop. Michelangelo's nose will be broken. There are several versions regarding the circumstances under which the young Michelangelo was disfigured. As is often the case, they differ slightly from one another, but all agree that the person who disfigured Michelangelo was his colleague, a young sculptor named Pietro Torrigiano. He would later indeed work in his field, as they say, creating figures from terracotta, painted clay. It is immediately apparent that nature did not endow him with outstanding talent, and for understandable reasons, he did not achieve fame. Perhaps his most famous act, which essentially ensured his name remained in history, was the blow he dealt to Michelangelo's face. The fact is that both the young Michelangelo and the young Torrigiano were welcomed by Lorenzo de' Medici, the famous ruler of Florence and patron of the arts. They worked in Lorenzo's gardens. It was a special enclosed idyllic space where numerous works of art from the past, particularly ancient sculptures, were gathered, and young artists under Lorenzo's patronage could work there, honing their skills, using these masterpieces of antiquity as models. As for what caused the quarrel between the two young men, I repeat, accounts vary. Some claim that Michelangelo mocked the clumsy works of his colleague. Others say that Michelangelo was consumed by pride, and in order to surpass all the other boys at Lorenzo's school, he not only practiced during the day in the gardens, but also continued to diligently draw alone in his room in the evenings. And thanks to this, he indeed outpaced all the others. Torrigiano noticed this and began to mock Michelangelo. How it really was, it's impossible to determine now. But we know that, according to Torrigiano's own admission, he struck Michelangelo in the face and he hit him, in his own words, so hard that he felt the cartilage under his fingers as if he had crushed a biscuit. And he would remember that nose for the rest of his life. Indeed, if you look at Michelangelo's portrait, and interestingly, only one portrait of him has survived to this day, which already says a lot. Michelangelo is similar to those modern people who do not like to be photographed, believing that there is nothing particularly special or attractive in their appearance to capture it unnecessarily. So, in the only image of Michelangelo, it is evident that his nose is indeed deformed. Indeed, the mark from the blow remained with him for life. The question is, why didn't the young Michelangelo defend himself then? Why didn't he fight back? Why didn't he retaliate? I think the solution to this mystery is very simple. He couldn't. Judging by the image of Michelangelo, he was not distinguished by physical strength. The descriptions from contemporaries who knew him confirm this. nature very often gives something, but demands something in return. To Michelangelo, it gave incomparable talents as an architect, sculptor, painter, and poet. But in return, it asked for physical strength. Michelangelo was a frail, timid child. And the work in the famous Sistine Chapel further deformed his body completely. I will not retell the tragic story of Michelangelo's work in the Sistine Chapel again, because there is no need. I'm sure you've heard it many times before me. I remind you that many years were spent creating this great work of painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Michelangelo worked on scaffolding or in a cradle under the roof. In an uncomfortable position, with his head tilted back, he painted the ceiling, and paint dripped onto his face. Long periods in this unnatural position literally twisted his body. And Michelangelo himself writes about this in a famous poem. The hips shifted completely into the stomach, and the rear swelled into a barrel as a counterbalance. The feet do not immediately meet the ground, and so on. He might be exaggerating a little, but in any case, the image of this mutilated, deformed body stands vividly before us. So, Michelangelo was frail from childhood, a slender, defenseless person who over time was literally deformed by his own work. At the same time, look at the stunning contrast with his own creations. How much physical strength that is sometimes even exaggerated, overemphasized, strength that he clearly enjoys, we find in his works. Look at his sculpture known as the Dream. I remind you, for the Medici family chapel, where Lorenzo and Giuliano Medici, the brothers, found their final resting place, Michelangelo created 4 sculptures representing the times of day. Day, night, morning, and evening respectively. His night is truly immersed in some kind of heavy, restless sleep. But at the same time, look, she's a real giantess, a fairy tale heroine. And what about his Christ? Risking offending the faithful, I will say that I envy his physical form. He's an athlete, a hero. And the Sibyl, one of the Sibyls depicted by Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, despite her old, flabby, wrinkled face, has powerful, muscular arms. This discrepancy is striking. And in my opinion, it's impossible to shake off the feeling that in his art, Michelangelo was trying to compensate for what nature had not given him. This dream of physical perfection, which he himself was largely deprived of, manifested in both his sculptures and his paintings. But Michelangelo was also deprived of another very important thing: human friendship, human interaction. No, of course, Michelangelo had friends and acquaintances, but not as many as Raphael or Leonardo. I remind you that the 3 titans of the Renaissance were contemporaries, yet their characters were very different. Raphael was everyone's favorite, the life of the party. A contemporary writes that when a group of artists worked in the same room, which happened quite often, say for a large commission to paint a church or some hall, and several painters worked on scaffolds next to each other, quarrels, mutual teasing, and crude jokes inevitably arose among them. Well, you understand, Italians' southern temperament. But as soon as Raphael appeared in the room, universal friendship and mutual affection were immediately established. His presence seemed to set people in a good-natured mood. Leonardo da Vinci is described by everyone as a very even-tempered person, impeccably polite, endowed with a sense of self-worth, yet not prone to arrogance or aggressiveness. Michelangelo, on the other hand, seemed to give the impression of being a nervous, jittery, and irritable person. There is a well-known historical anecdote that may or may not be true, but the anecdote is very characteristic. It tells of a quarrel between Michelangelo and Leonardo. Here's how it went. Leonardo was walking down the street when some young men approached him, asking him to explain the meaning of a cryptic verse from Dante's Divine Comedy. They had been puzzling over the mystery of this verse for several hours and couldn't come to a consensus. By the way, speaking of Italians of that time, you must admit, this speaks quite highly of them. When was the last time someone approached you on the street asking you to explain the meaning of Dante's verses? For me, never. But in any case, Leonardo might not have wanted to explain anything at that particular moment. Or maybe there was some other reason, but in any case, upon noticing Michelangelo walking towards them on the same street, he pointed to him and said to the young people, "Let the famous sculptor Michelangelo explain it to you instead." Judging by the context, there was no mockery or sarcasm here. On the contrary, it was more of a tribute of respect. Leonardo recommended Michelangelo as an authoritative person to whom anyone would not find it shameful to turn for clarification of a complex matter. It was a compliment. How did Michelangelo react? Michelangelo apparently heard some sharpness, some mockery directed at him, and shouted across the entire street, "No! You better explain the meaning of the verse to them. You, who conceived the famous horse and never completed it." Michelangelo had the right to throw a reproach towards Leonardo. Yes, indeed, Leonardo attempted several times to create a giant equestrian monument for the Duke of Milan, Francesco Sforza. These plans remained unfulfilled. Politics were partly to blame. At that time, Milan was occupied by French troops. And for amusement, the French soldiers shot at the huge clay horse that Leonardo had already prepared for casting. The model of the monument was destroyed, and the idea of creating a bronze sculpture was never revisited. There was no money and the timing was inappropriate. Only Leonardo da Vinci's drawings, the monument projects, have survived. Moreover, the projects were very bold because, judging by one of them, he planned to place the horse on 2 points of support, on its hind legs, an achievement that would only be realized in reality several centuries later. Thus, yes, Michelangelo could indeed have made a sarcastic remark about Leonardo, planning the monument but never finishing it. And if he's so smart, then he should better explain the poems. But his reaction was completely unjustified. He was responding to an insult, to teasing from Leonardo, which in reality was neither an insult nor teasing. But Michelangelo perceived it that way. This characterizes him as a person. He is also characterized by a detail described by his biographer Vasari. Vasari writes, for example, that as Michelangelo aged, he became less tidy. Often he would go to bed in the same clothes he had worked in all day, and then, getting up in the morning, without changing, he would continue working in the same clothes. Taking off one set of clothes and putting on something else at home, he was simply too lazy to bother with that. Vasari writes that Michelangelo was wealthy, but he did not like to spend money. He ate very simply and wore old, worn-out clothes. And personally, I see in this the habits of a person who is accustomed to living alone. I know this not by hearsay, and I am sure that even if you do not live alone, which I sincerely hope because loneliness is generally destructive for a person, you surely have friends, acquaintances, or relatives who exemplify the same thing. When a person lives alone for a long time, without a wife, husband, or close relatives under one roof, they really start to neglect themselves because there is simply no point in consistent self-care. Indeed, why bother combing your hair or dressing up if no one dear or close is looking at you? I will ask you to write in the comments whether I am right in my observations, and if you have seen examples of such behavior in people in real life. By the way, if you are going to write something, then also answer another question. In your observations, is loneliness related to insomnia? In my experience, it is related. And it seems that Michelangelo had the same issue. Vasari writes that very often Michelangelo would get up at night suffering from insomnia and take up his chisels, having made himself a cardboard helmet with a lit candle inserted at the top to illuminate his work, leaving his hands free. Vasari saw this helmet many times. Here the biographer writes about himself in the third person. No images of this peculiar helmet have survived, but we can imagine how, deep in the night, in the darkness, in Michelangelo's empty workshop, with this strange cardboard construction on his head, a candle fixed at the top, he worked on his creations. Silence surrounded this man. Loneliness enveloped him. And this could not help but affect his psyche and his works. If you look closely at his most famous sculptures, this strange isolation This constraint can be felt in them. Take another look at Night. She is truly immersed in some heavy, painful oblivion. Look at the famous figure of the slave. I remind you that Michelangelo created several marble sculptures that were apparently intended to adorn the tomb of Pope Julius II, but ultimately did not find their place there. These sculptures still pose a great mystery for art historians. By the way, we are trying to solve this mystery in the Art Enthusiasts Club. There are several major lectures about Michelangelo there. Slaves is a provisional name. Moreover, Dying Slave, as this sculpture is usually called, is also a provisional name. We do not know what Michelangelo himself called it. It is often written that this slave is seemingly trying to free himself from some bonds that constrain him. But these bonds are invisible. It seems to me that he's rather immersed in some heavy, almost lethargic sleep, almost a coma. Consciousness is felt within him, but it is somewhere deep down, beneath the surface. While his eyes are closed, his body is relaxed, and he seems to be in a kind of vacuum. And again, one cannot shake off the thought that the isolation, the constraint, the loneliness felt in these sculptures by Michelangelo is a continuation of his own detachment from people, his own loneliness. But there was one person capable of dispelling Michelangelo's loneliness. And strangely enough, it was a woman. I say strangely enough, because Michelangelo especially tried to keep his distance from women. None of his biographers mention any romance or affair of the young Michelangelo, and it's easy to understand why. On one hand, it seems he directed all his inner strength towards his art and perhaps didn't even want to expend it on living people. On the other hand, it's easy to imagine how a frail man with a broken nose, and over time further deformed by his work in the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo might have been shy around women. How could someone like him approach a noble beauty? But there are exceptions to every rule. And in this case, the exception looked like this. But who can resist such temptation? To be fair, this is a hypothetical imaginary portrait created in the 19th century by the French artist Lefebvre. But nevertheless, I like him. I like her because it's as if this woman glows from within. She is like a candle. She dispels the darkness that could not be dispelled by the cardboard device constructed by Michelangelo, or with a candle holder on his head. This woman was named Vittoria Colonna. She came from an ancient Italian family. I would like to remind you that the Colonna family played a special role in the fate of another artist, Caravaggio. They would patronize him, and after yet another murder, Caravaggio would hide in the Colonna estates. But Vittoria Colonna, whom we are currently discussing, found a friend, specifically in Michelangelo. When they met, Michelangelo was 61, and Vittoria was 47. And yet, Michelangelo fell in love with her as if it were the first time. Although, actually, why as if? It truly was his first love, with all the emotions and all the novelty that is characteristic of a first love. However, for Vittoria, it was not her first. By that time, Vittoria was a widow. Her husband, or rather her former husband, was also not a simple man. His name was Ferrante d'Avalos. He was an outstanding military leader and even had prospects of becoming the King of Naples. The fact is, at that time, there were ongoing wars in Italy, the so-called Italian Wars. In fact, the country was being divided between France and Spain. Naturally, the Italian rulers tried to snatch their own pieces of power amidst these events. And indeed, at some point, Vittoria's husband was offered to join an alliance against the Spanish king, in exchange for which he could receive the title of King of Naples, but he refused. Moreover, he refused, reportedly, on the advice of his wife, which says a lot. He was a commander, a knight, and she was just a woman. But there was something in her, some kind of inner strength, which turned out to be more powerful than his straightforward, masculine, brute force. However, in the year 1525, Vittoria's husband was severely wounded in battle and died in Milan. After this, a special period begins in the life of Vittoria Colonna. She mourns her husband for many years. She asks the Pope for permission to enter a convent and then to go on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. She receives permission for neither. As a result, Vittoria becomes a sort of nun in the secular world. A circle of mystically inclined friends forms around her. Vittoria writes numerous poems dedicated to her late husband, and they are filled with an almost religious reverence for him and hope for a reunion with him there, after death. All of this is very beautiful, very noble, with a touch of elegant esotericism. And it is precisely with such a woman that Michelangelo meets. When I say meets, or I certainly do not mean anything base or physical, heaven forbid, it is exclusively about the meeting of two souls. Michelangelo was always shy in front of this woman, and it's understandable why. Yes, of course, he is a recognized artist, but still, an artist in the society of that time was far from the most prominent figure. How could he compare to her? Almost a queen of Naples. Michelangelo's reverence for Vittoria was especially evident at the time of her funeral. Yes, Michelangelo outlived his goddess, and as one of his friends later wrote about it, he, meaning Michelangelo, loved her so much that, as he told me, he was saddened by only one thing. When he came to see her after she had passed, he only kissed her hand, not her forehead or face. That is, even after the death of his beloved, Michelangelo did not dare to kiss her forehead one last time. He only dared to touch her hand with his lips. And then his friend continues, because of this death he remained confused and somewhat deranged for a long time. The painting I showed you at the very beginning depicts Michelangelo's farewell to Vittoria Colonna. It can be confidently said that Michelangelo's only love for a woman was entirely platonic. To better understand the feelings he had for Vittoria, the drawing helps, first of all. A drawing by Michelangelo has been preserved, which presumably depicts her. Look at the eyes. See how she looks at the artist who is transferring her features onto paper. She looks attentively, cautiously, and somewhat inquisitively. It's not hard to understand why Michelangelo was always shy in front of this gaze. But their relationship is even better understood through poetry. Let me remind you that Michelangelo was a Renaissance man, in the full sense of the word, because, I repeat, he was endowed with talents in everything: sculpture, painting, architecture, and poetry. Many elegant sonnets by Michelangelo have survived, which were translated into Russian by Ephros, the translator's surname. Many of them are believed to be dedicated to Vittoria, and I particularly like and find one of them especially characteristic. It goes like this: I am your reflection, and from afar drawn by you to that height, from where my life comes, and like a fish caught on a hook, I soar to you. But since you do not wish to live in a divided heart, take both parts. Do you not know how impoverished everything in me is? And since the spirit strives to serve the better of two powers, I am entirely under your control. I am dry wood. You are the burning bush of God. The burning bush is naturally a reference to the Bible. Do you remember the voice of God speaking to Moses from the burning bush that does not burn up? This is a very important moment that leads us to the very essence of the story. Michelangelo's sonnet is undoubtedly very beautiful and elegant. Pay attention to two details of this sonnet. Firstly, Michelangelo refers to himself as a reflection of Vittoria and says that he is drawn upwards by her strength, which clearly means towards God, the source of his life. Secondly, he directly compares her to the burning bush, but that is a source of divine wisdom. This speaks not only of Michelangelo's love, but also of his faith, a special and profound faith. And no, I mean not the Christian faith, or rather not entirely it. The fact is that historians and art historians have long realized the enormous influence Neoplatonism had on the culture of Renaissance Italy, and on the art of Renaissance Italy. Neoplatonism is a philosophical doctrine that, as you understand, traces back to Plato. Plato had followers, and this tradition was preserved up until the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. It is believed that this philosophical tradition was brought to Italy by Greek thinkers who were fleeing from Constantinople. After all, at that time the Turks were pressing on Byzantium. The great art historian of the mid-20th century, Erwin Panofsky, insightfully once said that a person like Michelangelo simply could not help but become a Neoplatonist. And yes, indeed, although Neoplatonism was a popular movement at the time, any somewhat educated person had to be familiar with it, and of course, had to be able to engage in an elegant dialogue about Platonic love. And dozens, if not hundreds, of such Platonic dialogues have survived to this day. But it is clear that not everyone took it seriously. For many, Platonism was nothing more than an intellectual game. But Michelangelo, frail, feeble, lonely, nervous, unsociable Michelangelo, he was precisely the one who should have embraced Platonism deeply and sincerely. Why is that? The fact is that Neoplatonism is a philosophy that has many points of intersection with Christianity. Neoplatonists also taught about the existence of a single God. Neoplatonists believed that the spiritual is above the material, that our world is nothing more than a reflection of a more subtle, higher, and eternal world, where angels and spiritual entities exist, which in turn have God as their source, and so on. However, Neoplatonists also had several important divergences from Christian teachings. Firstly, they deified the love between people. To be more precise, the love of a man for a woman. Of course, for a Christian, love for one's neighbor is also important, but it is, you must agree, in second place. Love for God is more important. Neoplatonists had their priorities arranged somewhat differently. Do you remember that beautiful legend which Plato himself narrates in one of his dialogues? The legend that once, at the dawn of human history, people were not divided into two sexes but were a single whole. Plato writes that the first humans had 4 arms and 4 legs. They consisted of 2 fused human bodies, male and female, and moved by rolling on these limbs sticking out in all directions. And then the gods divided the people. And it turned out that each human soul has a kind of second half, which was cruelly torn away from it. And since then, all people wandering the world search for this very second half. And this constant unsatisfied longing, this burning desire to find oneself, to reunite and regain the original wholeness, to heal this wound inflicted upon us by the gods, this very feeling is what we call love. It's a beautiful, albeit sad story, and it helps us understand why the Neoplatonists so deified love undoubtedly of the Platonic kind. For them, it was always about the love of one soul for another. Nevertheless, it was this love they considered healing. It was this love they proclaimed as the highest and most divine feeling a person is capable of. Moreover, they spoke about the idea that since according to the Neoplatonic system, different souls exist on different levels of being, if you will. Some are purer, some less so, some closer to God, some further away. 2 souls upon meeting can somehow help each other. The lighter, purer soul, which is higher, can, so to speak, tow the lower soul and pull it along into the divine realms. If we now return to Michelangelo's sonnet, it helps us very well to understand what he means when he compares Vittorio to the burning bush. What he means when he says that he himself is like a fish, that she pulls up with a lure to where his life comes from, remember? And the second important divergence of the Neoplatonists from traditional Christian teaching was their view of the world in which we happen to live. This world, frankly speaking, is not that great. There are, of course, pleasant things in it, but there are far more pains, diseases, and unexpected misfortunes. Wouldn't you agree? And for thinkers, philosophers, theologians, this has always been a problem. How can one reconcile the idea of divine perfection and mercy with the fact that the result of his works, well, leaves much to be desired? It is clear that Christian thinkers have always insisted that God's creation is good, that the world is arranged in an ideal manner. After all, when in the Bible God finishes his work and looks at the created world, he says, "It is good," right? And God said, "It is good." Well, the evil that exists in the world is, let's say, a particular phenomenon. Some believed it was the result of human free will, while others offered different explanations. But in any case, overall, Christianity has always insisted that the world is good, that it is given by God to humans for use, given as a place for humans to live, and for this, one should be grateful. The Neoplatonists looked at this from a slightly different angle. The Neoplatonists insisted on a very strict division between the spiritual and the material. The spiritual is good. The material is evil. Look at the surrounding world, they said. And when I say they, I mean the most famous Italian Neoplatonists: Marsilio Ficino, Pico della Mirandola, Landino, Poliziano. So here it is. The world, they said, is terrible. Not only are we surrounded by dangers, wild beasts, robbers, thieves, wars, shipwrecks, bad weather, rains, storms, fires, but also the closest, most immediate thing we have in this world, our own body, is a prison. This body is fragile, flabby, unpleasant to the touch, rough, prickly. It decays. It is susceptible to diseases. Something always hurts in it. It literally decomposes while alive. We decompose while alive. The physical world, the Neoplatonists said, is hell. And we are all prisoners of this hell. I think it is now clear to you why the Christian church, of course, could not share the Neoplatonic views on the world. But now you understand even better why Panofsky was right. Indeed, out of all the figures of the Italian Renaissance, it was Michelangelo who simply could not help but deeply and sincerely embrace the doctrine of Neoplatonism. Just think about it. A handsome boy, whom other boys fear and girls adore, is unlikely to become a Neoplatonist. Because Neoplatonism is about withdrawing from this world, about salvation from it. And the handsome boy is quite content in this world, but not Michelangelo. Weak Michelangelo, sickly Michelangelo, lonely Michelangelo, timid and nervous Michelangelo. I understand this type very well. Such people really feel uncomfortable in the world, in life. They are here as if not at home. They are guests, and guests where they are, not very welcome. It is clear that a teaching that promises salvation, even if somewhat vague. The fact is that the Neoplatonists did not have any specific recipes for how to escape from this material prison in which we are confined. They had more of those, general philosophical esoteric discussions. But nevertheless, even if you are promised some hint of the possibility of departing to other realms, a person like Michelangelo simply could not help but grasp onto this hope. And so, looking at his works from this perspective, we begin to understand a lot. Let's take another look at his sculpture from the Slaves series. I repeat, Slaves is a conventional name. What draws attention here? It's how the bodies of these slaves or titans rise and try to break free from their underground prison. Remember from ancient mythology? So, what stands out is how their bodies are literally buried, compressed from all sides by matter. And this matter is coarse, unformed. These are not chains. This is not the wall of some physical prison. It is precisely a mass of stone that presses on them from all sides, embraces them, tries to swallow them, and they are breaking free from it. It is impossible not to see in this a hint at the Neoplatonic image of the soul, which tries to break free from that prison, a prison of sticky, heavy, dirty material mass, in which, according to Neoplatonic teachings, our soul languishes. If you live in St. Petersburg, you might have seen in the Hermitage the only work by Michelangelo in Russia, known as the Crouching Boy. This is also a conventional name. We do not know what Michelangelo himself called this sculpture, and we do not know what it depicts. Some say it is a boy pulling a splinter from his foot. It's hard to say. Frankly speaking, the splinter is not visible there. But the fact that he is grabbing his foot, yes, that's true. When we look at this figure, we very clearly feel, first of all, that he is in pain. He is truly writhing. Secondly, we feel a sense of compression, confinement. He seems to be in some kind of invisible prison, like, a transparent glass cube. We do not see its edges, but his body is very clearly fitted into this cube. And he seems to be trying to straighten up, but he cannot. If we look at this sculpture again through the prism of Michelangelo's Neoplatonic views, everything falls into place. The crouched boy is indeed imprisoned. This prison is himself. Because according to the Neoplatonists, each of us is imprisoned in the prison of our body. And yes, he writhes and suffers because the material world we live in is hell, where souls are sent for pain and purification. And in the same way, Neoplatonism provides a key to interpreting other enigmatic works of Michelangelo. For example, the so-called Donitondo. This is a small painting. In the foreground, indeed, is the Holy Family, but in the background there is something unexpected. Naked youths, who seemingly have no place in a Christian sacred scene. And yet they are there. Or, for example, this scene from the Sistine Chapel is again the Cumaean Sibyl. In the background there are two cupids, and notice that one of them is making a fig gesture. Or, for example, another one, well, as he is usually called, Michelangelo's rebellious slave, at whose feet, if you look from the right angle, you can easily distinguish a monkey. All these strange details and hints in Michelangelo's works actually form a very coherent system. And this is not only about Michelangelo. It is believed that the three great artists of the Renaissance era, Michelangelo, Botticelli, and Titian, were all strongly influenced by the Neoplatonic doctrine. And it is precisely this doctrine that helps to understand, for example, works like Titian's allegory of the three ages of man, which is actually not an allegory of three ages at all, but rather depicts the Platonic union of two souls. Many of Botticelli's works also receive a completely unexpected interpretation when viewed through the Neoplatonic lens. But in this video, I don't want to delve too deeply into that right now. Well, simply because not all of my listeners have a taste for such philosophical and esoteric subtleties. However, if you do have a taste for such things, I would like to invite you to the Art Appreciation Club, which I mentioned at the very beginning. It's a closed community of people where those who truly love and are genuinely interested in art gather. Those who understand how much inspiration, energy, and joy art provides, but who also want to learn to understand its language. In the club, we dive deep, exploring various interesting subtleties. We specifically talk about the philosophy, esotericism, and complex religious questions that lie behind famous works of art. And we do this in a simple and accessible form. The club has a huge number of lectures, which are divided into short segments of 50 minutes each. Watch one a day and imagine how much you will learn in a whole year. And if you have listened to my story about Michelangelo to the end, then most likely this subject truly interests you. And you are exactly the person I would like to see in the club. Something tells me that you might like it there. Therefore, there are two links in the description. There are two because you can join the club regardless of where you live. One link is for those in Russia, the other for those outside of it. We do not recognize any borders. There is a trial period. The first 7 days will cost you either 0 or 100 rubles, depending on where you are from. Well, then the regular price is 990 rubles per month, a recurring payment, a price affordable for everyone. Follow the link, read the detailed description, and check the list of materials waiting for you in the club. Come in, take a look around, and if you like it, stay. I will be very glad to see you. And of course, I hope that today's lecture helped you truly see Michelangelo from a new, unexpected angle. If that's the case, then I think the video definitely deserves your like. And see you in a week.